why I love people. I think people help you regulate yourself in many ways. A community allows you to do that. And a downside of that is that they kind of add narrative in places that you might not want to add narrative. As the creative, make that determination. Like, you don't have to put everything out into the world. You might want to put out into the world, but you shouldn't make it like assuming you could architect the resonance of the world through it. You need to put your own resonance into it. When you start architecting the thing you're making to like to resonate, it usually doesn't.
Yes, I want to hear your opinion on it first, is what you think about AI and what it can possibly do for us.
So there's like 17 questions in that,
for sure.
And I'm gonna solve the universe right now. So let's do it.
Welcome to the I Feel You Vodcast. I'm your host, Eddie Wise, and on this episode, I'm speaking to Michael Morgan. Michael J. Morgan is a dynamic and versatile creative whose passions encompass music, design, art, clothing, poetry, and more. With boundless imagination and an innovative spirit, he fearlessly explores new frontiers and infuses diverse pursuits with his ingenuity. On this episode, we speak on creativity within capitalism, his personal AI chat model, and the importance of thinking about how you think. Thank you so much for watching. We really do appreciate you being here. Please subscribe, like the video if you haven't already, and we really hope you get something beautiful out of this episode. Without further ado, please enjoy. Sweet, all right.
Can we roll right into it?
Yeah, no, we just jump right in. Typically, yeah,
All
we're gonna do your whole. We're gonna read your bio before the episode starts, but in this instance, we're just gonna roll and keep rolling.
Isn't it like a thing though? Like when we're like, all right, we're rolling. I felt like a vibe change, right?
It's always funny.
Like, oh shit, this is serious. Or we were just talking into the mics. Nothing's different.
I've been doing some artist interviews recently, and we have a host, and the artist. And it's funny to see how they talk before the cameras are rolling and then after.
Yeah.
It's a completely different. I think there was a study. I don't know if it was actually. This is probably just some shit I read on Twitter. But there was a study done where it was like they studied like something, like it was like a material or particles, something like that. And they studied what it looked like when it was just there, and then what it was like when there was a camera or something observing
effect.
it, right? Yeah, something like that. And I thought that was fascinating. It fits my narrative in terms of why people get the way that they do in front of cameras.
Yeah, it's almost like no one's watching. All right, now people are watching.
Exactly.
Or they might.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that it must be interesting to be someone who's always I guess I'm in front of a camera often, but imagine being like every single day you're doing another interview or you're shooting another scene. So like every day you're in front of a camera.
Yeah, you get good. You know how to like sit right, and you know how like the clothing lays on you and stuff like that.
But then I guess, does it change you, right? Like
everything does. I mean, I feel like being a designer, like I always questioned its effect on anxiety, design's effect on anxiety, because design is about kind of like seeing a future, rendering that future, and then there's a future that comes because of that thing existing. And so we were talking about Oppenheimer before. It's kind of similar. I had empathy in that moment to that, but like I was like, that is anxiety. Like you're just like thinking about the future endlessly. Like you're getting paid to do it. You're like incentivized to just constantly think about the future. And I remember having anxiety when I was younger, still to some degree, and the people around me that were all designers also had that, and I was like the really career kind of makes the person, and the person also kind of finds their way into careers that suit them.
Yeah, that's an incredible point, and I'm sure we're going to expand on that even more as the discussion goes on. First, thank you for being here, Michael. I really do appreciate you.
I'm so excited
being on the show.
I'm really happy to be here.
It's been a long time coming, and we're making it happen right now. First thing that I want to ask you before we get into all of the mess, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling overall really great. I just got back from a long trip with my dad. I'm feeling relaxed, excited to be here right now in this moment. Had a few good meetings today before this, so like I've been socializing. I'm feeling good.
Nice.
I also have this random twitch in my eye that you might see. The keen eye will be able to see it at some points. trying to get that figured out. It's kind of causing me stress, and then the stress triggers it. It's just this infinite loop.
When I get stressed out, I get sores in my mouth. It's the worst.
Yeah.
And then I get one, and then I get really, it doesn't stop me from being stressed. And then I get another one, and then I have 3 in my mouth, and I can't eat, and it's the worst feeling in the world.
And then I have nightmares that my whole just body becomes a sore. Like I don't literally. That's where my brain goes.
No, you just
I'm
start.
Like,
you're
in
just
freaking out,
just twitching all the time. Your eyes don't stop twitching.
I'm like, why can't the rest of my body just start doing it for fun?
That's funny. Well, I mean, we're stressed for good reasons, I hope. You have jump started a lot of different projects. You're very active, and you've just done so much, and I can't imagine what it's like to always be like, going, because I'm not like a super active in terms of like how many things I'm like trying to pump out and stuff. But I see your work, and it's inspiring. And I guess I'm curious, because you have an amazing skill set to explore a lot of different avenues and come up with ideas and things and innovate in certain areas. And this is something that you've talked about before, but I want to hear more about your opinion on how you use, how you use lateral and divergent thinking, right?
Yeah.
And how you use that to develop new ideas, and in terms of that process, and also how you remain out of the box. How do you remain creative in that way?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first part of that, like doing a lot of things, I wouldn't recommend it, especially for the Twitch that's happening now. I feel like that might be related, to be honest with you. But what I realized, like, more recently, I started calling what I was doing, rather than like side projects or side hustles, which I never like to say. I've been calling them experiments, and it's been sitting better with me. I also said this morning to someone I was talking to, like, the right phrase can really like change how you're thinking about what you're doing. And so prior to that, I was thinking of it as like side projects, like, and really just, it was me avoiding saying side hustle, but that's mentally the connotation. And so like, it had to do something when it had that title. It had to like be something. It had to mean something to like everyone. They had to identify me with this thing. It was like having a pet or something, it was like, there was like a very clear, like tight identity to it. And I realized like there was like a harm to the core of the play and the identity, or the core of the play, and my sort of identity with that thing became tampered once people saw it as something like a project or like a business or something. And so then I just said, all right, I'm going to think laterally here. How do I keep doing the same thing, but change the part about it that I don't like, but not change anything else about it? And it was like, interesting. And then it was literally just solved by changing a word. And I think that kind of answers that question of like, there are ways to solve problems that aren't obvious or sometimes counterintuitive, that are like the best possible answer for best meeting a lot of attributes that you would like to meet. And so changing the word, calling these things experiments, allowed me to say, well, what do I want to learn from this directly? So my relationship with it became, this is like a teacher and I am the student, but also it's learning from me and what I'm putting into it. So there's this sort of cyclical relationship with these projects now, and I don't have to do it all the time. I don't have to do it every day. There doesn't have to be a big process around it. There can be, sometimes there needs to be, but like, it's allowed to just exist in this little universe. And then when I want to pick it up again, I can. And when I want to put it down again, I can. And no one,
you're not beholden to an audience.
And like being beholden, it's like, obviously we're not, but like, there's something about why I love people. I think people help you regulate yourself in many ways. A community allows you to do that. And also they kind of, a downside of that is that they kind of add narrative in places that you might not want to add narrative. And that's sort of what happened. And so I got to this point of like just real high stress with all of it. I'm like, how do I carry the weight of all these projects by myself or with maybe a team of 2 or 3? And I was like getting overwhelmed. And I'm like, well, I didn't start any of these for like to make big businesses out of them. You know, I really like was trying to learn about fashion, or I was trying to learn about broadcasting and getting to interview my friends, or learn about creativity through interviewing my friends. So like when you really strip it back to like the function and not the form, and you start to just disconnect these pieces, it becomes a little bit easier to play with again.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the simplicity of just changing the name, would you consider that, is that lateral? And is that lateral thinking? Or
so I'll bring it back to the question. So lateral thinking versus vertical thinking is sort of the two thinking modes. So it's meta because you're thinking about thinking when we're talking about this stuff. And it was something that I'd never really done before. I'd always thought about things like, it was like, here's this thing I need to know, I'm gonna think about that, or here's this problem, I'm gonna think about that. But I never thought about my thinking around the thinking that I had to do. And I was introduced to a book, I don't know how, by Edward de Bono, called Lateral Thinking. It's one of his like 7 books. He's got another one called The 6 Thinking Hats, which are like different modes of thinking. His whole practice for a while was thinking about thinking, and how do I help empower creative people, specifically students, like young elementary school students, around getting them away from the kind of traditional modes of thinking that elementary school is going to teach you. Like you do this, then you do that, and now you have a thing. You do this, you do that, now you have another thing. And like, then you do that enough, and that's correct in terms of like instruction, to get a very clear output. But at a certain point, and even in childhood, you're like, I want something beyond that. Like, all right, now I know how to fold a thing to make a card, let's say, for my dad. But like, now I want to make a castle out of paper. How do I do that? You know? And so it's like, if you're only taught step by step by step, you kind of start to ignore the castle ideas, because it doesn't, unless you have all the steps to do that and you were trained in that way, you don't get to that place. And so I was like, oh, interesting. Like the thinking is kind of what allows great design to exist, which is what I was interested in at the time. Like, how do I make Apple level design where like they do a move that's so obvious, but it's just not. And you're like, man, that was so obvious, but it just wasn't, you know? It's that kind of thinking. It's like, it was the thinking that was being done about their thinking of the thing they were making that enabled that. And there's different techniques he introduces in the book. Really great read. And he kind of structures it like lesson plans for teachers and students. So like, you're a teacher, you give this to your class to teach young kids how to think differently about objects. One of them, a lot of them involve language. And that's where it sort of triggered my brain of like, okay, if language is like an element that we have to play with, even if like in anything we're doing, whether it's podcasting, you're writing questions, you're thinking about ideas, or music, you're thinking about song concept, or art, you're thinking about a concept on a canvas or anywhere. Even just saying like a concept on a canvas is like, well, okay, let's question concept. Let's question canvas. Let's break those words apart. Does a canvas have to be a canvas? Does a concept have to be a concept? Then you get into abstraction or whatever. But it's really breaking these words apart and just adjusting, like turning them a little bit to the left and seeing what happens. And there's a lot more. I can't summarize his book. I recommend reading it for sure. Of course. But that's sort of been a mode. And it's not always employed. You mentioned divergent thinking. Divergent and convergent thinking are thinking... those are like modes of a creative process. You can picture them like a diamond, where you start a process where you have a seed of an idea and very little, there's a lot more unknowns than knowns. And so you're kind of going wide, and you're kind of diverging, right, from the origin point. And you're asking a lot of questions. You might not even have answers to them. You might just be asking them, questions, seeking questions. Even they call it problem seeking, which is another phrase that was like really illuminating for me. You're getting out there, and sometimes like people could just go like that forever. You go too far, we have friends that are just like endless, you know, it's just, they're going, and I'm like, oh man, they're never going to converge. But that's the thing. There's a threshold where you have to say, okay, this is good enough. I've asked enough questions for me. I know that we can go on forever, but like everyone has their barometer, and they say, okay, this is good enough for me. Now I want to converge. converging is really the process through which you're now kind of question answering. You're answering these macro questions, these micro questions. You're coming to a form.
Yeah.
You're rendering that form. You're bringing it to life. So divergent thinking, where does that show up in the, lateral thinking, where does that show up in the divergence and convergence process? It could be anywhere, but it's favorable in the divergent process because you're like thinking differently. You might be turning over different stones to find new questions, things like that. And then in the solving of it, you could think differently. Does this can have to be that same size every time? Like why is every can the same size? There's reasons.
It sounds like,
but
yeah. It sounds like a lot of questions too. And I think what you really fascinating thing to and it's funny because you talked about Apple and how they would do something that seems like that's, of course that makes sense, but it didn't make sense before. And that has to do a lot with the way that you're talking about the lateral thinking, is that it sounds very creative, as in that you're questioning every step and you're questioning everything that you're doing, down to the language that you're using. And that process has given you a lot of different ways to approach what you're doing, and a lot of different convergence points, I guess, right? That's the end goal, it seems like, is to converge on something that kind of lines up in terms of the questions you've been asking.
Maybe it's never been seen as a form, or maybe the form might be a t-shirt, but what's on it is different, unique in some way. Absolutely. And I think like these ideas, like you have to use any idea with caution.
For sure.
You can diverge too long. You can converge too quickly. You can do both too quickly and really not think of the consequence of putting an artifact out into the world. And then there's like too much questioning. There's fatigue that comes with that. So like, and I think that's kind of where I've learned the threshold needs to be, is like, where do you kind of tap out as you, the being that is you, and it's uniquely you. Like there's going to be a moment where you're like, all right, I'm good. Let's converge on this thing. Cause that takes energy too. So like you have to, it's like an energy conservation, process,
And it's funny because now that I feel like hearing this, and I invite the people watching to do this as well, introspecting and kind of looking back at all the projects that I've taken part in. When I think about a lot of the things that we've done, there's been a lot of diverging, and it gets fun to diverge.
Oh yeah,
it's really fun.
It's real fun.
It's like, oh man, well, what can we do this with it? Can we do this? Oh, can it be we're gonna make this film. Oh, can it be a movie? Oh, can it be a show? Can it be a series? Can it be a ongoing thing forever? Can it be a documentary? And then can we film it? And then can we present it at this place and that place? And like you can diverge so far off of what you originally, what the original concept was. And there's a supreme value if there's a person there, or if you become the person that can say, you know what, this is it, right?
Right.
Answering all of these questions, this is what seems like the best answer right now.
And I think to that point, like you're lucky enough to have a team.
Yeah.
So there's more resources available, all different amounts of energy and like skill sets where like they can start converging on things as you're going. Yeah. Because like starting with we should make an Instagram reel, and that turns into we should make a feature film. Like that's not wrong inherently. No, like there's nothing right or wrong about it. It's more so comes to what are the resources available, and that's financial, but that's also like, I hate the term, but I'm going to use it, like human capital, exactly. It's like actual like monetary capital, and then energy, like what energy, what energy source do you have that you can use to, fuel this idea and ultimately converge on a part of that idea. Because like when you converge, it doesn't mean the whole thing is done. In fact, when something's in the world, that's a whole new life.
That's another divergence.
That's another point. If you think of it as like a fractal, it's very much a fractal, because inside of that diagram there's going to be like trees of questions, so it's
beautiful.
It kind of just keeps going. But putting something out into the world is another piece that I think a lot of people that diverge too much, or maybe they're kind of on an infinite divergent process. They might have a job and then they're just like diverging about ideas, or maybe they don't have a job. They're just diverging about ideas for a while. they never get to see that idea out in the world.
Yeah.
And there's something about seeing it in the world, whether that's like me making an album that has like 4 listeners a month on Spotify, or like, you know, whatever,
Same.
like merch where like, you know, the first year we had like 200 orders, like that was rad, right?
Yeah.
But seeing like what I got from those 200 orders, the information I got about the thing and like what its function really is in the world, that's invaluable.
Yeah.
And I think like, when you're diverging too much, you lose the point, which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to bring it back to you.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That actually, because I'm going to bring up something, but later on we're going to talk about a little bit more about the oh my gosh, now I'm losing my train of thought. Oh my gosh. Because you mentioned some
Go
beautiful.
anywhere.
Anyway, we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. Before that, you talked about human capital and you talked about resources and things like that. And, you know, of course, everybody knows we live in, if you're in America or, you know, a lot of the major countries nowadays, we live in capitalist societies, right? And, you know, a big part of that is it perpetuates the pursuit of profit, you know, and it ensures, you know, ideally in that system, it ensures innovation, it ensures, you know, progress and, you know, development, right? Because there's capital that can back it. Yeah. So in the society that we live in, when it comes to creativity and how difficult it's become for a lot of people, what are your feelings about creativity within a capitalist society? And are you of the opinion that it does in fact kill creativity?
I think people kill creativity. I think that like, because creativity isn't a product. It's a product of your mind, but it's not a product of like that you're releasing. Like the can right here isn't creativity. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's some ingenuity behind that. There's creativity around maybe what should we put on the label, or like kind of that divergent process that led to that. Yeah. Now capitalism will impose limits to that process depending on what the outcome is being used for. So, for example, that can, which is at Kirkland brand.
I love it. Gotta love it. Costco.
Yeah. Right. So they I recommend kind of looking into Costco and their economic model. It's fascinating, but you know, they have constraints. The designers of that team, the people making those cans, the number of cans they need to make, there's already inherent constraints to the divergence and convergence process before it even begins. Yeah. So the origin point of that idea already begins with a constraint, and therefore, like, you could argue can only go so far, whatever that even means. Yeah. But like, again, thinking laterally, like so far, it might just be like, if we change this step in the manufacturing process, we can do anything, you know? So
we solve this, that, and that. Yeah.
I think what it does is it adds anxiety into the mix. And it's often been labeled like the age of anxiety.
Yeah, I think you talked about this earlier as well.
Yeah, capitalism. Well, I talked about it from a design point of view, but this is like, I think capitalism adds anxiety into the world in that we're always like, I need to make money, or this person makes more money than me, or like we're assigning our own personal value to how much money we have. Yeah. You know, capitalism really is just about like assigning value to goods and services, and then selling those in a market that's open enough that people can buy it and whatnot. Yeah. But like when we start assigning personal value to how much money we have, like as if we're the people on the market, when really it's like the products or the services we produce, that is just a thinking trap where you get caught in the anxiety of it. And I was like peak anxiety last summer. I was kind of like trying to figure out what's my next move and whatnot. And I found this pamphlet about capitalism and anxiety. And I read through it and was like, it's so clear, this through line. It really does create that state. And why I would say it's not true that it doesn't kill creativity is that you can still be creative while anxious. Yeah. But studies have shown that you're going to diverge a lot less. You're going to seek a lot more options when you're anxious. So therefore, you're not as creative as you could be because you're not as open as you could be because you're anxious. So and you're anxious because you're like trying to make money or whatnot. So I try to avoid connecting one to the other directly, because I don't think there's a direct through line, but I do think there's an indirect through line to these things. And if as creatives and as people, breaking those things apart and saying, well, what are the things in that chain that are actually resulting in me feeling less open or me being anxious? Seek those answers, right? Because if you can solve for those, I think like any of the type of work you're doing, whether it's creative like work or in the arts or not, will benefit from it.
For sure.
But I don't think it kills creativity. You can be creative in your room for 30 minutes a day, you know, if you have a job that is exhausting and you need it to pay the bills, you know.
And one thing you said about is that you mentioned that, you know, we are creating product and things to give to people, or things for people to consume. Oftentimes, though, and especially in creative industries, there are artists that want to be the product. They want to be the, you know, in the age of influencers and you know, reality TV and the realism that people are looking for, you often have to become the product, right?
Pseudo realism.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a really interesting relationship, and it's something that's probably pretty unique to our time, especially with how accessible everyone is, right?
Absolutely. And when the person wants to become the product and they still can't disconnect that even the person that is the product isn't them, like that disconnect needs to happen. If it doesn't, you can just get sucked into a vortex of anxiety. You're really you're then leaving it up to society completely to determine your happiness, your levels of anxiety, your levels of openness based on every post or everything you say or do. So it's really dangerous. I think, you know, the Kardashians have gotten successful because I think they do know that when they're on camera, they're not the same people that they are when they're not on camera. I don't know them personally, but I could almost guarantee that they're not that way all the time.
Yeah, they're releasing a documentary on Kim and Kanye's divorce on HBO Max.
Oh, interesting.
Blew my mind. I just never thought that would happen, but you know, it makes total sense.
They're getting paid.
And there's so many people are going to watch that.
Oh yeah.
So many memes.
So many memes.
And one thing that you talked about as well earlier is that there's something different that happens when it's presented to an audience, when it's given to, or even shown to your friend, shown to people. When you're a product, if it's you or if it's the thing that you're making, when you invite other minds, things shift. And it might be slight, but it dramatically affects in terms of your thought process and the way you think about it.
Yeah.
And one thing that actually in the last episode before this one, I had a conversation with Izzy from Isaboko. Yeah, they're a fashion designer, and we discussed the apathetic relationship between the consumer and the artist, the person giving the product. And it's a really interesting relationship. And do you feel like there is an ideal relationship when it comes to the artist and the audience, or is it always I guess what's your ideal in terms of what you would expect?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Is there an ideal? I think like when you get down to like the physics of the universe, there's some harmony that exists somehow. And I think each person being like a little planet, there's some harmony that exists for each person. I can't say what that's going to be for everyone. Yeah. I can say that like there's things to caution yourself around, such as like, you know, thinking that you and the product are this synonymous with each other and not realizing that disconnect, or doing too much, like trying to almost people please the audience. But I want to dial it back a second and say, there's something amazing about, I like to speak in dualities, and this is another duality. Like there's a downside to the audience, but there's an upside to the audience. Of course. In fact, like it's why, like we're sitting in front of a camera that someone's going to see. There's an audience inherently. What are the upsides? So let's talk about them, right? It's like the upside is it forces you to button up, right? Like metaphorically, but also not, you know, like you're showing up, you're trying to bring your ideal best self to this, your best work, your most valuable creations, right? Your offerings of your soul into the world, right? And you're ultimately like, and I think this is again another language thing where it's like, well, what is happening after that point where the audience becomes involved? Like, where is that line through which like the artist and the audience exist? And I think like you're kind of creating these creative offerings. You're bringing form into the universe inherently. Like boom, here's a form. You're putting this out into the world and seeing its resonance with other people.
Yeah.
You know, does it connect with another person or not?
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome. Like looking at this wall right now. I don't know if it's on camera.
It is. Yeah.
But man, I'm like, my eyes been going to different things, and I'm like kind of sitting with one, and it's creating new ideas just through that resonance, right? And so I think like you're ultimately creating a form to put into the world that may or may not resonate incredibly strong or incredibly weak with an audience. Weak being maybe a few people, strong maybe being a lot of people, or a few people but very intensely. And I think it should be known that that's going to happen if you want it to happen. It also should be known that it could happen, I should say. Like I make a lot of art. There's a lot of art in my room that no one's ever seen, and then there's some art that very few people have seen. There's some art that everyone has seen that I know, or as many people as could see it based on the algorithm or whatever. But like you as the creative make that determination. Like you don't have to put everything out into the world. You don't have to like, you know, I think that statement is the statement. You just don't have to put everything out in the world. And there's some things like you might want to put out into the world, but you shouldn't make it like assuming you could architect the resonance of the world through it. You need to put your own resonance into it, and then have some hope that people, when they see that, will feel something from it. But I think it's in the architecture. And as a designer, like I do think about architecting things often. It's a fun switch to turn on and off during the creative process, especially when working in the arts. Like to not architect the artifact. Yeah. That's where it gets dangerous. When you start architecting the thing you're making to like to resonate, it usually doesn't. Yeah. And when you're like, oftentimes, this was a fun thing I made like in 3 seconds, but the vibe was so high when you made it, that somehow resonates so much more. Yeah. And I think it's like people can see a trick. People could see a trial. Yeah. People could see an error. People can see like when you're putting like mastery into something. These things are just easy to see. Because we are like, well, I could never even fathom, you know, like there's an awe that comes with great work and in any art form. Yeah. And it's that awe that we're like, I think that resonates with us, you know, like, wow, like I can't believe this came from someone that's a human being that exists, you know.
And it's really fascinating to hear it's an interesting perspective to think about, because when you're creating content, one of the hardest things about creating content is that there is going to be a long time. In most cases, sometimes you get lucky, but in most cases, there's going to be a while where there are very few people even receiving the content, the ones that you're putting out. And it's funny that you mentioned the art on the wall, because every time somebody does come in here and they sit in this chair, they get to receive what's on this wall. And the beauty about art is that all it takes is for it to resonate a bit, and then that person can go out and create more art. And when you're creating, there are forms of content, there are films, there's music, there's so much out there in the world that so many people haven't seen, that most people have not seen, right? So all it takes is for me to look back just a little bit, find something super niche that nobody's ever seen, that for some reason is on the internet, nobody cares about it, find that, it changes my life. Yeah. And as a creative, I go on to do something great, right? There's resonance, and even if it's not being received by the world, the masses, there's still an important aspect to it.
Oh, now you're talking about history, which is, I mean, if it's sustained, it has more resonance than most things being made, I think, today. They're just like, they're meant to be like firecrackers. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I don't want to take you off point.
No, you're good.
But I want to talk about history for a second, because that is like such a well of inspiration. And like, a lot of people want to believe that we're like just in this era. We're born when we're born. We exist inside this bubble of our lifetime, and then like we contribute and whatever. But like that's true to a degree, but at the same time, you're the result of all this history, creative history. If we're just looking at that, forget all political, social history, like there's that too you could tap into, but even just looking through the history, let's say you're a musician, look through the history of music, or even the history of the genre of music you're interested in, see the threads, see how they all connect. It's a beautiful thing. And there's elements you could take from all these different places, and you can architect when you're designing your own work, not to like say, oh, this is going to make everyone like it, but as when you're creating and crafting your own work, history is such an amazing inspiring place.
There's a reason why like remakes resonate. There's a reason why the most direct interpretation. There's a reason why Michael Jackson impersonators resonate. There's a reason why.
The Weeknd or no? Yeah. Sorry.
Hey, whoa. No, there's a genuine. I mean, that's one of those things. It's like where you hear that song and it reminds you of like a sound that you really like. Yeah. That someone might have tapped into first, but I mean, I jokingly say it, but it's true. Like and The Weeknd became a success all on his own with a completely different audience. Right. And with a younger audience that now carries with him. Right. Yeah. So like you can tap into something, and I think that's where of course that's where virality comes from, and that's a whole nother conversation, but I love that you talked about resonance. Also, when you talked about the audience and the feedback that you get, there's like this loop that you talked about where you put something in and you get something out, right? And you learn, but you also teach. And there's actually that actually translates to the relationship between AI, between us and AI. And I want to talk about that as well, because you are actually someone who has been, or you've innovated in that space. Yeah. You created a bot. It's called Chat MJM. Yeah. Michael J. Morgan. I love it. And it's a model of yourself. It's a model of myself. And you use transcripts from podcasts, blog posts, Instagram content, like a whole ton of things. And, you used it to kind of emulate you, right? Yeah.
To kind of see like no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say
it's so funny to say out
loud. No, I want to talk about that. I want you to kind of elaborate on that as well, and what your experiences was, because of course a lot of people have a lot of mixed feelings about it. It's one of the most talked about things at this point, I would say. Yeah. The relationship between us and AI, and how that impacts creativity, and also how that impacts the people who work in creative fields. And how do you think, I guess I want to hear your opinion on it first, is what you think about AI and what it can possibly do for us. And also I want to hear about how you think the industry is going to adapt to it, especially when it comes to intellectual property rights.
So there's like 17 questions in that.
For sure.
And I'm going to solve the universe right now. So let's do it. Well, I think so. I taught a class on the history of interaction design, which college level class. So it was like big leagues. I'm like, I have to do this right. Did a ton of research. I mean, I spent 3 months researching the history of interaction design, documenting every single moment that could possibly have happened from 1890 all the way to today. And then at the time, this was a year and a half ago, thinking what was the future, and AI wasn't really in the conversation even in that moment, which is just fascinating to think about how fast. Well, AI was in the picture. I should say large language models, LLMs, are the kind of what people are calling AI. It's not, it's a subset, but those weren't really, they were in the picture, but not at the level of sophistication, I guess, as a GPT model would be. But studying the history of that, 1890, a woman named Ada Lovelace documented on paper the first algorithm. So she was exposed to early computing. She was like a daughter of like a wealthy something or other, and was interested in this field, a really emerging field, like real emerging. Yeah. And there's written documentation of her saying that like she believes that it'll be able to do advanced calculations, that it'll be able to predict and interpret human emotion, that it'll be able to interact with humans back then.
That early.
So the AI conversation to me is very different than I think a lot of people, because I say, oh, it's inevitable. Yeah. It's not a surprise. This is something that the history of interaction design from 1890 all the way to today, so like 100 plus years. I'm not going to do math live or ever. We've been working towards that. And I say we, meaning because my perspective of history has shifted to, if I'm in an industry, I work in technology. Yeah. If I'm in an industry here, I need to look back and see everyone that's affected that industry, because they're working alongside me ultimately. Their contributions are working alongside me. The affect of their life is working alongside of me. And, you know, back then she had made that prediction. I'm sure other people were also making that prediction, and they were starting to work with ones and zeros, which were just like electricity going on and off, and eventually getting to computing that we have today. So I think AI is inevitable. We've also talked about, we haven't here, but the idea of the information age, people are aware of. We've been existing in the information age. A question no one asks, I have never heard someone ask this, is like, what is the like pinnacle of the information age? We've thought that we've been there. It's like, oh, it's social media.
It always feels like it's
and it's there. Like, I really hope that MySpace, it wasn't the pinnacle of the information age, right? I certainly hope that like whatever Instagram's doing in any given day isn't the pinnacle of the information age. I don't think that's what we were working for. But if you break that word apart, you have age, which is just a period of time spanning, which is a gradation between agricultural, industrial, and whatever comes next, which is another thing I'm very interested in. But we've been existing in it. Our whole lives have existed in it. And the Industrial Revolution, we've seen it. We haven't necessarily participated in it as young people. Some have, but most haven't. But there's been a lot of emphasis on technology in this era. But what's the technology for, and what is the pinnacle of the information age isn't asked often among people. It probably is in certain circles in technology. So when you start to see AI and you start thinking about, well, where could it be? Well, like, what could the pinnacle be? Well, you're breaking information now and age apart. So let's talk about information. Like information, there's information everywhere. Like there's information about everything everywhere. Pockets. Yeah, the whole earth is just a circle filled with bits of data that together collected can form information and ideas. There's histories essentially that have existed within this sphere, you know? And so what AI is kind of doing in a very interesting, fascinating sense is sort of trying to absorb all of the data points to then make information out of it. Whether that's historical data, whether that's existing data. It can't pull future data unless it's sort of in a black hole somehow and it's able to do that. I don't know. It's crazy stuff. I'm sure it's happening, but another universe maybe. But so like current data, past data. And so for me, it was like, well, I have historic data. You know, I have historic data all the way back to, you know, drawings when I was a kid. Like, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of feed an AI that was sort of just my own, and there was nothing else being added into it, and just start to see like what it could say back, and maybe surface insights that I've overlooked because I was tired or intoxicated or angry, or name any emotion, you know, like I had ignored it, but it was right there in front of me. And so that was just kind of an interesting experiment. And I took a class to learn more about it. And they were like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to learn about me. like that's a fascinating thing. Like, you know, you can Google everything else, but like to learn about the self, it's such a hard, it's a lifelong project. And so can we use technology to assist in that? And then can I open that up to my therapist? Can he have access into it? And, you know, I mean, there's just a fascinating array of things that could go wrong and things that could go right. But, you know, in this small little project that I made, it was an experiment of what can I do with AI? How can I learn? Can I surface insights about myself? What might I be missing? What might I have overlooked about myself? Or how I communicate my life.
Incredible information. Funny enough.
No pun intended.
When it comes to, and this is all based in language models, right? These are all in language models. Are there other ways to implement different kinds of information in language models that aren't like what is, I guess, because I'm vaguely familiar with a lot of the things that you're talking about. I listen to a lot of podcasts and debates and conversations about this stuff.
As one should. Stay informed.
Stay informed, but language models are super fascinating, and I think that's what's catching the most attention because it's pretty impressive when something can spit back language at you. Yeah. It almost seems like it understands it, right?
Right.
There's something there that feels like it understands what it's trying to say.
Right.
Are there any other models that are being explored that don't involve language? Is it all language?
It's all a language.
Yeah.
Everything's a language. Like, so, when we started the history of interaction design, it's like ones and zeros. It's a language because that language really represented other things, you know? So it ultimately is a language. AI prior to LLMs being the mainstream, was doing data analysis and, algorithmic changes and things like that. Every company's like, we've been using AI forever or, for the last 20 years or so. But the LLMs, there's definitely different types of LLMs, some that are like private, that don't have any repository of information but what you give it, some that have a pool, some that you can choose what that pool is. Also different ways of grouping information. So like basically kind of what it's doing is like taking a pool, chunking that massive amount of information into smaller bits and then labeling it with like, these are things to reference. It's sort of like how you would organize, like if you had your, like every word, how would you organize it? You start categorizing by a certain schema, like letters. Okay. Dictionary. All right. A, B, C, D. And then we'll alphabetize it by the next letter. So it's kind of doing that and then sampling from that. It's all rooted in kind of how we think about thinking. Yeah.
It's really interesting to because language is, I guess, everything. When you really get down to it, it's how we express pretty much any understanding that we have of the world as it exists.
Yeah, and it could be a visual. It could be a visual language. Could be spoken. It's why I find myself to be long-winded, and people have said that is like I'm trying to find the right words, and we don't have, or I don't have a good enough vocabulary to find it like real quick. Yeah, exactly. And just say like 2 words that say this thing. But I also don't want to say something that isn't entirely true or entirely what I believe. And that requires a rewriting and a lengthier narrative, which as someone who likes podcasts, you probably appreciate. And other people that don't, they're like, I don't get it.
Rhetoric is really, really interesting and complicated. And it's impressive when somebody is like a master of rhetoric. You're doing a great job explaining it. I feel informed. I hope the people at home feel informed as well at this point.
I like looking at them.
Yeah, they're great to look at.
They're so shiny right now. Shiny lens.
When it comes to I guess language models and AI in general, you talked about visual language as well. Of course, a lot of people, the feelings that they have is that it's threatening creative jobs as well. Yeah. Do you think that, because you talked about how these models have to reference a pool of data to get anything out of it. How will industries and how will these companies within these industries, how will they address the issues of intellectual property rights? And how do you think, like, is one of those things being like they have this pool of IP that they can just like access and do whatever they want with, or do you actually feel like it's going to threaten creative jobs?
I think it's going to threaten lots of different jobs, not just creative jobs. This is speaking more to a sort of economic view of how this might affect the economy in general, and a nihilistic view of this in my dark days, which I do have many. I say, okay, well, and I've debated this with friends, I was like, look, if we're going to talk about this, let's talk about both sides. Like, what is like the utmost amazing things it could do? Yeah. And then like, what is the darkest things it could do? So I feel like it'd be great if we have the time to kind of discuss both, but it'll take a while. I'll say that, what could it do positively and negatively for the economy? Well, business owners, first of all, are going to try to cut costs wherever they can. Yeah. It's just how the game's always been. Yep. They can cut costs. They could increase prices, and then they're increasing profit. Unfortunately, that is like the cycle that we found ourselves in. Yeah. And this like lemon squeezing extraction of profit, I don't think it's right, but it's happening. Yeah. And so that is going to continue to happen. And you have a tool like this who's like a worker. It's just another worker robot. Great. You know, and could you pool everyone's work over the next 5 years into your own private LLM or private AI that could then create designs for you or create other things for you? Sure. At some point, there's going to need to be some oversight. There's going to need to be an operator. I don't know how many operators you'll need. You'll at least need one. I don't know if that's the executive. I'm sure there will start to be companies of one that can operate and do enormous things, like a 17-year-old with an advanced AI, no other team members, and the right APIs connecting into all sorts of like connecting to Instagram, connecting to Shopify, and they're building stores and they're sending content back and forth, and they're doing this all through an AI. Yeah, I think that will eventually happen in the next decade or so. It's helpful to think about these things in decades. I've found when looking back, you can see real progress in decades. That might change too. Things might be exponential. I don't know, but I think you'll see that. I think you'll see shitty bosses being shitty, like, and being like, all right, I could do this, or like, I did this for you. Okay. Well, that's indicating that there are parts of your job that can be automated. You should probably learn how to do that a bit. Don't tell anyone yet. Keep it a secret as long as you can, until it's not. And then then don't keep it a secret and say, I've mastered how to use these things so I can be an operator. And I think, and again, this is like a very general view because it's like I'm kind of summing all jobs. Yeah. But in terms of creative fields, like I love using it as a creative tool. Yeah. It's fun to throw things in because it's taking what you give it. So if you give it 3 words, it doesn't have a lot to work off of. But if you give it like 3 paragraphs, which is what I do, like I'm giving it like a rich wealth of data, or I'm giving it, 15 3-hour-long podcasts, like it's going to produce something that's marvelous and interesting and unique. And so doesn't mean I have to take that verbatim and use it. And that's like the creativity is, well, what do you do? Right. That's always like essentially creativity is like asking what you do and then answering it, and how do you get to that answer? And so the AI can help assist that for sure. I think it's fine. Just like there's bad music now where you're like, this is just such a generic like song. Like there's not giving me anything. Like there will be that made by an AI. Meta released a model last week that you could type in like the first thing I typed in was the Descendants punk rock song, 170 BPM, key of I think it was B major. And then hit enter. And then like 45 seconds later, I got back a WAV file and I hit play and it sounds like the Descendants at 170, B major, etc. Now, it sounded insane. It sounded like the Descendants, like they just like put like 2 songs together and blah, like smashed it up, right? It had no nuance, but I did it 40 times and then I took 10 of them that I really liked. I put them all into Logic. Yeah. Actually, GarageBand. I'm not going to front. It was GarageBand. For the real people that know, they know. That was for them. So I put it in GarageBand. And I went through and was like, okay, wow, this drum feels sick. Like, this is such a unique, only AI could have made this ridiculous drum fill, but it's rad. I'm going to keep it. Yeah. Keep that thing. Keep this little, like, chorus melody thing that they're doing on guitar. Oh, this other drum fill, this other pattern, whatever. Yeah. Now I start composing, right? So you could use it that way, or I could have just said that, save, upload to Spotify. Here's my band, People are doing that too. But
it's really fascinating.
We'll see what resonates really.
Exactly. That's what's going to be the big thing. And hopefully what it does is that it gives us more time to find other ways to be creative, and it kind of, I think one of the most important things that you said in there was that you can't really fight it forever. You can't be you're gonna you'll look like those people that didn't want moving pictures or they didn't want to see silent pictures go away.
Right.
It's like you're gonna stay behind, right?
I mean, look, I have friends. One of my best friends goes to the opera all the time.
Yeah.
Only reads classic literature.
And there are people for that, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to be within the industry, right? And that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
If you want to be a part of this industry, there are some things that we're going to have to adapt to. And one of those things is learning how to operate these models.
Yeah.
To sustain your own creativity and keep up with the pace, and also maybe provide some value to some other places where there can be some reciprocation. So.
And I would also say just understanding the consequence of the thing. Like we look to it as like, oh, is it good or evil? It's both. But if you understand the evil and where it can go dark, understand that so that when you're working within it, you can safeguard it as one individual next to another individual who's ideally doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Instead of saying, well, the government needs to just regulate this thing, and they're going to come in and they're going to do a large slice, because the same way, like you're asking me, like what's going to happen, and I'm generalizing, they're going to hyper generalize it for the whole
especially with all
country,
these old people,
and then be like, yeah, exactly.
We're like, this looks bad.
They don't even understand it at all.
China.
So, they're going to chop it down to like 1% of what it could do, and it's they'll take the rest.
Yeah,
but
exactly. Exactly. Thank you for explaining all of that, and also doing your best to generalize, I'm sure, a wealth of knowledge that you have on this topic. In all of Michael's content, he has a ton of different things, and you discuss this in length in other formats. So if you're curious about all this stuff, go ahead and check it out. Speaking on, what you have out there, you have a lot of current projects. One of them that I wanted to talk about is your living room sessions.
Yeah.
Living room sessions is a variety show and interview series.
Yeah.
And where you bring people into a space and you have a lineup of a poet, a comedian, and a musician. Correct.
Correct.
What inspired the idea of the living room sessions, and also why that lineup specifically with those three art forms?
Okay. Two very clear things converged,
Yeah.
which led to the living room sessions. One is attending an open mic called Restless Open Mic. Check them out. They're in Astoria every Monday. They just hit their 2-year anniversary.
Wow, incredible.
So imagine how many weeks that is.
Open mics are tough to keep up too.
Yeah, there's like 20 plus artists going every week. So just think about the number of artists, the amount of creativity there. It's a beautiful space, super safe space. People try everything from like new bits to things like, hey, I'm working on this on my phone. I just wrote this before. I wrote this while watching this other person before me.
So
like
cool.
Everything,
Sort of open mic, yeah.
I started going there, and I was initially playing music there, and I would just play like songs on records I made. But they're all very like sad songs, and I didn't really I wasn't feeling that way, but I can't write happy songs. I just can't. I can't do it yet. I've never learned it. I tried. Other than like pop punk songs, I can't write a happy song. So, and even those are not even that happy. But I was like, I'm just gonna like make up songs on the spot. I'm just gonna go there. I'm really good at like making up songs. People have told me that, and I could just generate a song out of the blue. So I was like, I'll just go there. I'll ask someone for like a topic, and I'll just write the song on stage, and that'll be my 7 minutes. It'll be fun, like iterative sort of improvisational thing. Did that, loved it. Those songs started veering towards like comedy. I was like, oh, that's a very fascinating space. Like I've never really played within the comedic space before. I've loved comedy. My mom and I used to watch comedy as a kid. Those are some of my favorite types of movies. I just love comedy's ability to like bring big issues to like a visceral laugh, and make people think in a different way.
It's honestly the best.
It's great. It's so great. And
comedy.
so it was so fun to play in that space. And so I'm doing that. And obviously I'm surrounded by all these great artists. I'm seeing all these people. I then, someone was, one of the honors of an open mic is being featured. And you can host the whole mic. Everyone comes on, you like get to talk and do the thing. And a friend of mine, she came up to me and was like, you need to host this. Like, I feel like you'd be a great host. Like just the way this comedy is. I eventually got rid of the guitar, I should say. And so I was just talking into the mic, just going up there talking about anything. And it's sometimes very funny, sometimes awkward. And I preface it by saying like, this could go anywhere. Like, just like work with me here, It ends up being really fun. And so she was like, yo, that needs to be like 3 hours long and needs to be like bringing people on and stuff. So I got to host my first one. Was like, this is an amazing like feeling.
MCing is an incredible experience.
Incredible.
Especially when people are there with you. It's so great.
And it's a ride. Like these shows are a ride. Like, cause I don't know I have nothing scripted. Like anything could happen. And so, last time I was like in fetal position on a couch at the last living room sessions, reenacting a skit of someone's mom who was there. It was just, it can go anywhere, and I want it to, so that's awesome. So that was one thread, was like the open mics and my opening to comedy and hosting. And then the other thread is history. Like I said, I taught history, and that really opened this switch in me about my own personal history. And I was thinking about my grandfather. He used to have a variety show.
No way.
My dad told me about this. It was on the radio. It was like a local radio station in New York, and he would do a variety show, and bands would come through and they'd play a song or whatever. And I was like, wow, what a way to tribute and honor like my family and kind of bring some of that legacy forward. And like, it's just like this thing that I love to do already. Like, what are the odds? So I was like, okay, well, what's the show? My grandfather was a poet. I've been a poet forever. Yeah. I have hundreds of poems. I'm a musician as well. I love music. Yeah. And I recently got into this comedy space, and I've been making a lot of friends in that space. And I was like, those are great. Those are just three great performance arts.
Like the three things.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. Well, I guess one of the reasons was that at the open mic, it was primarily that. Like, there was primarily those three types.
Typically at open mics, it's comedy, music, or poetry. Yeah.
So I was like, well, let me just pick my favorite people that I see. And I'm like, oh, they're rad. I want to give them more than 7 minutes. Let's double it. Let's double it or give it to the next person. Like, let's double it. Give them about 15 minutes. Because I was like, the other thing I was thinking when I was constructing it, I don't want to get into too many details, but the idea that like you go to see an artist, you don't know them. You go to an open mic, you see them do one song. Cool. You like them, you don't like them. Easy. What if you do like the person? You don't know all their songs. Yeah. So what is the half step performance between seeing them at an open mic versus seeing them like, at any venue, any venue, Irving Plaza, right? Yeah. Like, okay, there all their songs, you've listened to them, everyone there knows them, they're all massive fans of them, whatever. Yeah. But there's no middle step. And so like there's local shows and stuff, but I was like, the real middle step to me, because the local shows to me just simulate the bigger shows. They're just like less people. Yeah, exactly. And like less rehearsed maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
But the real half step to me was like, give them more time, but don't give them like 30 or an hour. Give them like 15. Like, let people really get into them and hear it and get another taste where they're like, okay, I really do like this person. But the other thing that's missing with this, I found, was like, what makes you interested in an artist isn't just their art, but it's getting to know them as the personality. For sure. Every artist we like we know we could probably reference some interview or something about them that you like. In most cases, of it.
But if you're really into their person, So
I was like, well, how do I do that? And then I was like, well, let me interview them. Yeah. But instead of doing like a serious interview, which I tend to, I was like, I'm just gonna have fun with it. Like anything goes with these interviews. There's games. There's like me just asking any question that comes to mind. Could be about anything. It could be embarrassing. Could be funny. Could be silly. But it's a great space to play, and through that play, show the audience this artist that I admire, that I want them to see and appreciate, in a short form 30-minute set between the interview and their performance, and we kind of divide that depending on how much material they have. They get another taste, just another moment to interact with that artist. And because there's three, they're bringing in their own crowds, and there's some overlap, so that is sort of what the living room sessions are. It's just a great chance to showcase artists. It's paid. We get to pay all the artists. We get to pay the venue. That's amazing. Yeah. And we instituted this model where I said, look, if you have like a full-time job and you don't need the money, like, and you want to give that to another artist who might not, or maybe they're just not making enough, or they could use extra cash, like you can donate your portion into the pool, and that's just going to be divided among the other people. And then last time they were like, we want you to have some of the money. And I was like, no, like we don't really need it. And then I was like, oh wait, we actually need mics.
Yeah, there you go.
We needed mics. So then I was like, and I asked them, is it cool if we use this much for that? And they were all down. And then we gave the rest to the venue, which they have hosted this event for free and all of those open mics I mentioned for free for the last 2 years. So I was like, cool. Any money we can give.
Yeah, of course.
This was over what we even had estimated, which was sick.
That's amazing. I love your thought process behind it as well, and it feels like it fits into a very specific category, maybe even its own category. And I was lucky enough to attend one, and it's a great experience. And I think that, you know, whenever you get a chance to make an artist that might feel comfortable, make them a little bit more uncomfortable, you get to kind of expose a little bit more of who they are.
Yeah.
And in some cases it's the opposite. Is like they're feeling pretty uncomfortable. Maybe they're not used to performing, or they're still new to this, but you give them the space to kind of feel a little more within the space, right? With connected to the audience. Sometimes when you're an artist and you're out there and you're doing your thing, the audience can feel a little bit disconnected from you and maybe not feel like you are properly presenting what you do, and then, you know, it can kind of cause a little bit of confusion on how you feel about what you did, right?
Right. You get off stage, you're like, that was a terrible show. It's like, nah,
everyone's
just
everybody's
confused
great
here.
Oh yeah,
we're all just
everybody's
confused.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's
that's
the first time seeing
it's beautiful.
You. They don't know you.
What is your dream lineup for the living room sessions?
I can't do that because a lot of it's like right now it's all homies, you know.
Of course,
I mean?
yeah, no, it is.
We gotta get you on one for sure.
That'd be sick. I'm down.
You know, I just reached out. You know Wilma? You know those guys?
Love Wilma.
Yeah, I reached out to them.
It's so funny.
They're down.
They're awesome.
We couldn't do the last one, but we're either the next one or the one after that.
So
would be
curious
sick.
what their set would be like.
Yeah,
that's
like
so cool.
And it would be acoustic too.
Yeah, that's
like,
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I love because I love their music. They're great, and they're great live performing.
Yeah, so they're on the radar.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I met this guy in New Jersey. I saw him perform. His name's Gavin. I forget his last name. I want to plug him, but he's an incredible like acoustic guitar player, instrumentalist. He was like playing like with his feet. He's playing a drum. Like he was doing all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Amazing vocals. Just I was like, you need to be in front of more people. Like I was like, more people.
I love
need
when
to
you find those kinds of people. Yeah, that's so cool.
like he's in the upcoming, and then comedians, this guy Tori Huggins, like he's hilarious, and he just performed at the open mic, and we've been trying to get him on. Poets, I mean, I know so many. Like I feel like if I start naming, I can go on forever. But JC, the poet, you saw him perform at our like first version of that living room sessions.
So cool.
And it was like his event. And so his girlfriend Amanda, she is an incredible poet as well. They kind of have a similar style. I want them to like collab more. I'm excited to see that. I definitely want her on there. My friend Christine, I want her to on there. I think I had Christine written down for the next one. I haven't reached out to these people yet, but by the time this all airs, it will be all sorted. That's so cool. There's so many poets. A friend Rebecca. I mean, there's just so many people that I really admire, and it's like not even just, it's cool to not just put people on because they're your friends, like put people on because they're actually dope, and like and you enjoy watching them. I was like, I just get to sit and watch you do this like for more time than I ever do. Like sick, you know. That's
special, especially for those people, because oftentimes they don't even know how much it means, you know.
I mean, Julius was our poet last time, and I mean, like, I can't say enough kind things about his writing and how much I admire him, and just he's so intelligent and so well read and such a good performer when he goes on stage. And like I've only seen him do like 7-minute increments. Sometimes we'll give people 8 or 9, you know, if they're really on fire, but like, you know, to give him that 15 and like to really watch him, you know, with his audience and everything, it was just is beautiful to see, you know. I learned so much from his presentation and his cadence, his writing.
That's awesome.
It's great. It's great to have cool friends.
Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, that's how I feel all the time, every day, especially that I get to interview people. So many friends that do so many cool fucking things. I'm excited to see everyone continue to grow.
You're cool with this denim outfit, though.
Oh, thanks, man. Listen,
I hope the audience can see that.
I hope so, too. This is my first time doing denim on denim. I was a little nervous about it, but it works. Yeah. I mean, hey, all credit goes to Christine. She is my stylist, and she does such a great job. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show and just giving us so much to think about and move forward with. And, you know, we're excited to see what you got going on in the future, and to, you know, I'm sure you have some new fans here. And before we end off, one, can you give us a few ways that we can support you? Maybe if there's anything specific going on, or ways that we can see what you got going on. And then if you don't mind giving us a few more words of wisdom.
Okay. Ways to support. I'm always supporting other people through my Instagram account. I'll always be posting if I see a friend in need. So supporting me is supporting people I know. I would say follow me on Instagram for sure. It's at Michael, Michael, J.Morgan.
In the description as well.
Put that in there somewhere over here. Words of wisdom. We didn't really talk about play too much, but I was talking about this today. I had a job interview today and I said two things. I was like, I'll know it's going well if I mention my purple Crocs and if I talk about the decor of my room. And I'll only do that if I feel like they want to know. And this person wanted to know, and it was a really great discussion. Wherever it leads is what it is, but it was a really great discussion. And I talked about how when I was designing the room that I live in now and the room I was living in before, I decided that every time I bought a new item, because I was moving with nothing, I would get a different color item each time. And that was like the only rule. So it would be like, it had to be on the color wheel and it had to keep turning. And so it just created a space that was vibrant, had a lot of color. Kind of like this wall has this, like, so much color. It adds life to your life, and it creates a space that evokes creativity. And really, we didn't talk about play too much, but I think it's related to that. And what I was saying to the woman on the interview today is like, it's like at some point there's this threshold where play just like turns off, or we're adults now, so like the play part can't happen. But I think finding things, whether they become projects or anything, just finding something to enjoy and to really, play around with, scribble with, try new things out. There's and feeling like you're allowed to. Like when you realize that you're allowed, quote unquote, to play as an adult, like it's a great feeling. It's a really great feeling. And I think I would just encourage that. I'd say seek some play in your life. It doesn't for no other reason than to just do it. As Nike once said, just so corny.
Perfect.
I'm becoming a dad right now.
That's awesome.
I'm just dad jokes now.
Listen, that's.
I'm in my dad joke era.
I love it. Finding ways to add life to your life, I think, is really great. So, thank you for being on the show. We appreciate it, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Appreciate it.